Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to be playing around with the Poinsettia Bloom die, as well as this Snow Garden Sentiment foil plate and die set. Now, I knew I wanted some holographic for the outline of the poinsettia, and I also wanted that same thing for my sentiment. So in order to have them match exactly, I like to use a solid hot foil plate and foil a piece of hammer mill cardstock. I'm starting out with my sentiment first. I have the Merry Christmas sentiment with a piece of foil, pretty side to the plate, put it on my machine, set the timer, and once it's done, I put it through my Platinum 6 machine for the pressure. You need both the heat as well as the pressure in order to do hot foiling. And I love how beautiful, simple, and elegant that is. Then I'm pulling out the hot foil plate, or the solid hot foil plate, and doing the quarter sheet of hammer mill cardstock. So I do a quarter sheet here so that I can use it for a mat as well as for die cutting. Now, in the end, I messed up with die cutting because I was thinking about something else and forgot about my mat. So I end up doing another piece of this off screen, and I'm also going to solid hot foil the negative part of my sentiment. So I have a choice at the end of my card between a positive image and a negative image for the sentiment, as well as the fact that it gets double the use out of your foil. I love the fact that you don't have any foil go to waste when you have a solid hot foil plate. So I'm pulling those and putting them aside, and I will die cut them in a moment. I'm going to use another piece of hammer mill cardstock and put some strong double-sided tape here. I've got some Suk Wang, and I want to do glitter with this Poinsettia Bloom die. I absolutely love with holiday cards that metallics and glitter are almost a given. You don't have to, but you can go all out with the glitter. And I just was in a mood where I wanted to play with some glitter and Copic markers. It's one of my favorite techniques. It's really quite simple, but it has a beautiful wow factor to it. So I'm taking that tape covered cardstock and I'm putting my die facing the backing of the tape and putting it through the machine. Now I put it both ways. I take that die out and I just check it. I'm not looking for all of the inside bits to cut through, but I'm looking to see if most of the outside bits have cut through. And it will make a little bit more sense in a minute. It just makes your life a little bit easier if the outside bits have pretty much cut all the way through. If there are any inside bits that have cut through, you can take some tape or some double-sided tape and use that to hold them in place, because we want those inside bits to be held in place on this piece. And once again, it'll make more sense in a minute. While I have my machine out, I'm pulling out the die cut for that Merry Christmas sentiment, and I'm going to die cut those and put them to the side. So I'm going to die cut both the positive and the negative here. Might as well have them here and ready to go for when I need them later on in the card. When I'm doing a sentiment or a shadow die around a sentiment like this, I like to tape it in place just to make sure it doesn't shift in my machine as I'm putting it through. Nothing worse than having something shift and then ruining your sentiment. So those are both perfect, putting those to the side. Now I'm taking the die out of my tape covered cardstock and I'm using a die pick. I want to make sure all of the backing pieces stay on the tape, and by using a pick, I'm pushing out any of those pieces. I'm also checking it as I'm pulling my die off just to make sure. If by chance something happens to stick into the die, you can pull it out and put it back on the tape. It's just much easier if it doesn't come off in the first place. Now I am die cutting my poinsettia with the holographic foiled cardstock, and this is where I made the mistake. I wasn't thinking of my mat, and I die cut utilizing the space the best so that I had space for other things to die cut later. Now this is where creativity started setting in, because I didn't think about the mat that I wanted and did it this way. I have to go and foil off screen, but it made the creative juices flow. It made me think of different ways that I wanted to use this so it didn't go to waste. And I absolutely love some of the things that happened because of this. And it's one of those things when you're in your craft room and you make a mistake and you start thinking creatively, some of the best techniques or the best results happen. Sometimes they don't, but it's always fun when you have a creative problem like this and you have to think of a way to solve it or to utilize it. And it's really cool, some of the things that we can come up with. So I put some press and seal on the back of this piece here because I want to keep all of those pieces in there. This is going to keep everything together. and I can put that aside for when I want to be using it. I'm going to take that same Poinsettia Bloom die and I'm going to put it in the center of this cardstock, and this will make a little bit more sense in a minute. This is one of the ways that I like to utilize and make my craft supplies go as far as possible. I'm die cutting out of the center of this piece, and this piece is 4 inches by 5 1/4, and then I'm going to use the outside part as a mat behind my white front card front. No one is ever going to know that anything was die cut out of it. And then you get two things for one. By having it die cut out of that center and not having to use 2 1/4 sheets of cardstock as well as foil, you get double the use out of your supplies, basically. So off screen, while I was hot foiling, I took most of the outside of this tape covered cardstock off. There's a couple pieces that haven't die cut all the way through, and they're really easy to get out. You just want to use a pair of detail cutting scissors and just slightly snip where those pieces are just getting stuck. Usually there's only a little piece, and it just makes it easier to have a pair of detail cutting scissors and just to snip those off. We want that outside to look as neat as possible because it is a finished piece that's going to be on the front of your card. Now I'm taking off the tape backing for my poinsettia petals, as well as the tape backing for the center of the poinsettia. And then I'm going to put some clear microfine glitter on top of that. By using this tape here, it just makes it super easy. The glitter sticks to it really, really well. And then it's going to hold that glitter when I go to color it with some Copics. After I pour the glitter on there, I use a piece of tape backing to just burnish that in place. I always keep my extra pieces of tape backing, especially if I'm using large sheets, and then I use them for this. If you don't happen to have any tape backing, you could use a piece of wax paper. It'll work the same. I also use a Swiffer duster to take off any excess glitter that might be sticking to any of those remaining pieces of tape backing. It's got a bit of static to it, so it likes to stick. Easiest way to get it off is that Swiffer duster. Now, when it comes to coloring glitter, I like to use Copic markers. Any alcohol marker likely will work. I just don't, the Copic are the only ones that I have. I'm taking my marker and putting my ink where I want that color the darkest, and then I'm taking a blender pen and just blending it out, and you can see how quickly it works. If you tend to get too much ink on your blender pen, you can just scribble it onto some scrap paper to get some of the excess off. I typically wait until I'm done with that color before I do this because it really doesn't matter until you move on to the next color. I love the detail and the dimension you get from this technique, and it's really super easy. It might seem complicated at first, but once you've gone through the technique a couple times, it's really, really easy, and it's got a beautiful wow factor because this poinsettia is all glitter, but it's colored glitter. Now, when I first learned about this technique many years ago, whoever told me about it said you could do this same technique with dye-based markers as well. Now, technically you can, however, Copic markers have a really, really good quality tip to them, so doing this technique over rough glitter doesn't ruin that tip. When you go to use it with dye-based markers, they don't have as good a quality tip as Copic markers do, so it's really easy to ruin a marker, as well as the fact that dye-based markers don't dry on non-porous surfaces, and this glitter would be a non-porous surface. So for weeks afterwards, if you press into that glitter, you can pull up ink. So this is why I like to use Copic markers for this. Once my flower is done, there's no need to wait for it to dry. It dries in seconds. I can take the outer part of that tape backing off, and then I'm using a piece of wax paper to put over about 3/4 of that flower. I'm going to take my die cut holographic piece, and I'm going to line that up with this tape backing, and that exposed tape is going to tape this holographic piece to the glitter piece. Now, by having that wax paper covering 3/4 of it, I'm only matching up about 1/4 of this image. Once that is matched up perfectly, I can pull this wax paper down to about half of the image, line that up, and then I do it in about 3 or 4 stages. This way I don't have to worry about having exposed tape and accidentally taping something wrong. By doing it this way, I can take really good care and try to be as precise as possible, because this piece is going onto the front of your card. You want it lined up properly. If by chance something doesn't line up by about a hair, you can take some detailed scissors and snip that off, or you could take a little bit of that glitter and just add it to the exposed tape just as a glittered edge. But you can see how adding that wax paper in between makes it really easy to line things up and not need to worry about tape sticking where you don't want it to before you're ready. After I'm done that, I do take a piece of wax paper and just rub it over the whole thing just to make sure that tape and that holographic cardstock is stuck really well, and make sure that it's not going anywhere. I'm taking that same Copic marker that I used to color in my poinsettia, and I'm just coloring the berries on the outline. Now, first I tried coloring it and then using that blender pen to blend it out so that it had some shadow and dimension, but it really just removed that ink completely from there. So instead I went back and I colored it again. Now these pieces in the center here, I don't want to waste them. So I'm going to take another piece of that press and seal, and I'm going to put it on the back of this die, burnish it really well to make sure that that press and seal has good contact with those die cut pieces, and pull it out of the die cut. Now I'm taking some black mixed media heavy stock, and I'm going to die cut the same poinsettia using the same technique that I did with the second holographic piece. So I want to use that black mixed media heavy stock as a matte as well as an outline for the poinsettia. I did that die cutting off screen so those pieces are ready, but you can see how doing this gives you double the duty when it comes to die cutting the center out. For my card front, I'm taking that poinsettia using the chisel edge, and this is a little tip that I like to do a kind of a cheat matte so that I don't have extra layers. I use the chisel edge along the outside of the cardstock and just line it. It looks like there's a piece of burgundy cardstock underneath there, but it's so thin and you'd never know unless you look really close at it that it's not there. For the card front, I'm taking my poinsettia piece, putting some Barely Art glue on the back of it with a fine tip bottle. I like how precise I can put the glue here. And then before pulling my acrylic block off of those pieces, I just figure out what the placement I want. Then I put my acrylic block back on. It just holds everything down, makes sure everything has good contact, and it frees up my hands to work on other things. So for the black mixed media cardstock poinsettia, I have just the center pieces here on some press and seal, and I'm using a detailed blender brush with a white pigment ink pad, and I'm just ink blending from the center of the poinsettia out. I'm going to use one of the really cool iridescent Cloud 9 ink pads, and I'm going to ink over top of this. Now, if you didn't see my video where I use these ink pads, these are really cool interference ink pads that have a different look on white than they do on black. So by putting white on this black cardstock, I'm going to be able to utilize being able to see both of those colors here. Now at this point, I'm like, this would look cool, just the black and white with the holographic outline, but I really wanted to continue with the idea. Now, once I have this white pigment ink on here, I'm going to use a heat tool to set that pigment ink, and then I'm going to take another detailed blending brush and use that interference Cloud 9 ink pad. I want to make sure that this white ink is heat set before I use the other ink, because I don't want it to start lifting this up and contaminate my ink pad. Once that is completely dry, I'll take that detailed blending brush, and I'm doing the same process that I did with the white ink, but I'm just going a little bit farther. So this particular pad looks teal on white, and then on black it has a bit of a pink tone, and often you don't see that iridescent part of it until the ink is dry. And you'll see me at one point in this, I lift up the ink pad cover, wondering if I have the right pad. And I do, and you see a touch of that pink once it's completely dry. I'm not sure if it shows up on camera as well as it does in real life, but I just thought this would be a fun play on this poinsettia, just something a little bit different and a little bit of a different color tone. But I love the fact that you get kind of pinks and teals with holographic cardstock, so I thought it would play off really nicely. I took a piece of teal cardstock for my mat, and I'm just putting it on the back here, letting that dry with an acrylic block on to hold it in place. And then I have a white mat here to go onto the front of that. I'm going to put that same acrylic block on there, and then I'm using my Barely Art glue and the fine detail brush to glue down the holographic outline. Now I like this fine tip on here because it just makes you have a lot more control over how much glue you're putting down. The Barely Art glue has removable tips that you can change, but I really like this small bottle. It's just a little bit more convenient to grab and to hold, and then I don't have to change any tips. Once I have that outline here, I'm going to start putting in these petal pieces, and it's really just like putting in puzzle pieces. I'll put my black poinsettia the same position as I have the one on my card, and then I'm just putting those pieces in one at a time, holding them in the tweezers, putting the glue on the back, and then just inserting that puzzle piece. For my third card, I'll show you a little bit of a different, easier way to do this without having to put glue on the back of each and every single petal. But at this point, this is how I was doing it. It doesn't take too long. It really goes quite easy, but it is sometimes kind of a pain to have to pick up that glue bottle and put the glue on each and every one of them. I love the look of this black and teal poinsettia though with that holographic. I think it looks really, really pretty. And the little just pink hint that you get on the black part of the poinsettia is really fun. Now, the other way to do this is I could have put that iridescent ink over the entire black piece, and you would have gotten a little bit more of the pink tone showing through on the black cardstock, but I also wanted the black to show through just because it's a little bit different, something unique, and it just has a really great wow factor to it. I just loved the look of it, but if you wanted more of the pink iridescent color on that black, easy enough just to add a little bit more ink onto those pieces before inserting them into this poinsettia. I didn't have to heat set that iridescent ink, just letting it dry was enough. It dries on its own. It does take a little bit longer than dye-based ink, so make sure you wait a little bit longer, but it will dry on its own. And by using the tweezers here for putting the glue on and for inserting it in place, I don't have my fingers in the way when I'm trying to place those pieces. It just makes it a little bit easier. Now, when it comes to any type of greenery in the garden around Christmas time, I absolutely love non-traditional colors for things. My favorite flower is hydrangea, and I love it when they're in pinks and purples and creams. So when it comes to poinsettias, when I see them in the store, I absolutely love the pink ones and the blue ones and the purple ones, just because they're non-traditional. So that teal and black poinsettia is totally my cup of tea. I absolutely love the pink and burgundy one, the first one, but I really love the black and the teal. So for this third card here, I'm taking that piece that I cut that black mixed media cardstock out of, and I am gluing that down. Once again, gluing down some white for the card front, and you can see how you can't see that there's a piece die cut out of this. This is a trick that I use all the time with specialty cardstock. It's a great way to make that specialty cardstock go a little bit farther. Because it's a little bit more expensive than regular cardstock, it's always nice to find ways to stretch it a little bit. So I'm going to put this outline down exactly the same way as I put the one for the third card down, putting that Barely Art glue on the back of it and putting it down on my card, and then putting my acrylic block down to hold it in place. Now this first piece I put down exactly the same way as the second card, but then I think about an easier way. Taking 3 or 4 petals, putting that glue down, and then just inserting those pieces. Now I didn't want to put the glue down on the whole flower because I didn't want it to start drying on me and have it not hold on to the petals of the flowers. And you can see how this goes together so much quicker and easier than the third or second card by having to put that adhesive on each and every individual petal. So it makes it really easy, and by having these pieces on that press and seal, you know exactly what piece goes where. Every single one of these petals is unique enough that if I had these petals to the side, I could probably figure it out. It would just take a lot longer, and this way, so much easier. The funny thing is I've had this press and seal for years, and I used it more creating these cards than I've ever used it. I bought it in order to put on my paste to make sure that they don't dry out, but I used it more on this day doing these cards than I ever used it on my paste. So it comes in super handy, and I love it for this use here. Now, once I have these last pieces in place, I'm going to put that acrylic block on there just to hold everything down flat while it dries, make sure that everything has some good contact. But I love this black outline with the holographic foil in the center. Again, it just has a really cool and unique and unexpected look to it. So the last step here is to take my sentiments, and I had a little bit of a hard time playing around exactly where I wanted the sentiment. I didn't want to cover too much of the poinsettia, but it also looked a little bit odd in that bottom right corner. So I do end up covering a little bit of it, but not too much. And I did use the positive and the negative. I used the positive on I think the second one, and I used the negative on the first one. Because I have a third card here that I hadn't planned, I take a sentiment that I had made from a previous card and put that one on there. I love how different and unique each one of these cards is, and it goes to show when you make a mistake, sometimes happy accidents happen, because I had only planned on the first card and number 2 and 3 happened, and I really, really love how they look and how different they are. I'm taking some glossy accents, just putting some of that on the center of the flower as well as the berries. It just adds a little bit of a different texture, and I'm going to do that on all 3 cards. I love how different it looks on the burgundy berries than it does on the holographic cardstock, as well as the mixed media cardstock. It's nice to have just a touch of a different texture. It gives a little bit more interest. I'm going to let that completely dry. It doesn't take too long for it to dry because it's a really thin coat, but you do want to make sure to let it dry completely before stacking your cards or doing anything else with them. Once they're completely dry, this is the end result. I am absolutely in love with how they turned out. If you have a favorite, pop it in the comments. I'm really curious to see what other people's thoughts are and which one might be your favorite. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fantastic day.